Hi, my name is Caroline, and I'm an intern here at Sports Philanthropy Network. Thank you for joining us today for the LGBTQA plus panel. I'm now going to hand it over to our moderator to begin.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Ashley Young. I am a university student at University of Washington. I'm a senior in sports enterprise management. I'm also a women's tackle football player for the Utah Falcons. And on this panel, I also identify as LGBTQ. I identify as a lesbian female. And I would like to introduce our guests this morning. So we have Grant, we have Kim, and we have Jonathan. And what I'm going to go ahead and let them do is introduce themselves, who they are, and some important background information that they would all like you to know for today.
Who would you like to go first?
You, ma'am. You spoke up first, Kim, so you're up.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim, and I am a cisgender out lesbian. I've been out for over 30 years. I played soccer at Cal Berkeley, Division I 4-year scholarship recipient, and came out when I first got to college when I was 17. I also graduated from college, and there was no sport opportunity for me as a female athlete to be paid, et cetera, back in those days. So what do? You go to college again and you get another degree. And so I went and got my master's degree. I used to work with abused and neglected children. I was a former family therapist in the state of Michigan, a registered social worker for the state of Michigan, and hated living there and needed to exit out of that work because there's only so much time you can do to work with child abuse and very severely abused children. So I left that career field, went into sales, moved to Colorado, packed up my car, my cat, my best friend, landed in Colorado. It was cheaper to move there than it was to try to move back home to Southern California, and got into sales and just kind of did that turn and burn of corporate sales. And that philosophy of corporate chasing student athletes was a big thing. So a lot of corporations go after student athletes. We have kind of a mindset. They chase after us, and then we chase a dangling carrot in corporate America to chase money, chase dreams of someone else's. And I just got burned out and I quit that career path. So round 3, and started my own business in 2010 and created my own service-based business. I was a residential housekeeping company and built that up for about 10 years and sold it 2 days before COVID, and then had to revamp myself again. And I am a business coach who actually works with people who have an athletic mindset to create their own small businesses. So that is a little bit about my background and who I am, and more than happy to answer any questions that people have about what it's like to be a lesbian in the workforce, what's it like to be a lesbian business owner, and any processes about being an open athlete as well. I also coach women's soccer for fun, coach girls, and being an open lesbian for 14 years, there's been a pathway and a journey about what that experience has been like as a lesbian coach and a female coach. Those things also come into play. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kim. I really appreciate that. Since Grant says he's a talker, I'm going to go ahead and let Jonathan go first.
I'm Jonathan Heider. I identify as a gay male. My background was through Paralympics. I was born a congenital quad amputee and got into athletics at a very young age because I was a high energy kid, and went not only to the national stage, but the international stage, as well as a Paralympic swimmer, landing myself a spot on the resident team at the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I trained full time leading up to the 2012 Paralympic Games in London, England. Beyond that, my experiences, I graduated with an undergraduate degree in architecture and a minor and certificate in real estate development, doing a lot of advocacy work for accessibility design. But also on the side, I also own my own business called Split Star Productions, emphasizing in diversity inclusion through keynote speaking and workshops, focusing in on professional sports, athletics, disabilities, accessibility, as well as LGBTQIA rights. So it's a little bit about me.
Thank you. And Grant?
I feel like you really hyped me up here. No, this will be a short answer. So my name's Grant Freilich, went to Arizona State University, was always into sports as a kid. After I graduated from Arizona State, got a master's in business management and joined Teach for America. Ended up spending 7 years teaching, 6 of them in low-income schools. I've taught elementary, middle, high school, both high and low income. I've coached sports throughout that time and recently became involved with the Sports Philanthropy Network. I started a nonprofit known as the Pride Tree, and the Pride Tree is about bringing LGBTQ plus programming directly to youth on site at schools. So we bring after school programming, parent programming, mentorship, and beginning next summer, we're looking to bring out a free summer camp in 2022. So I'll talk a little bit more about Pride Tree later on. I do not identify as part of the LGBTQ community, but I am an ally, and I'll talk a little bit more about where my passion for this comes from later on in the panel.
Thank you, Grant. I appreciate that. And so while we're doing this, I'll make sure to monitor chat. So if any viewers come in that want to go ahead and ask questions, I'll make sure to get that to the panelists right away. And then panelists, you as well, if you have any particular topic you want to speak on, go ahead and let me know, or go ahead and just chime in. And then the first thing I want to talk about is maybe if you guys could talk about your passion for why you're involved in this, or how obviously you're involved in this, and maybe what type of impact it is you're looking to make. And anybody can go any order.
So I can start off with this one. I'm the grandson of a Holocaust survivor. And when my grandma was 12 years old or 11 years old, she was put on a train headed to Treblinka, which is a death camp. When that train arrived at Treblinka, her entire family was killed. My grandma jumped off of a moving train at the age of 11 years old. And the only reason my grandma was able to survive the rest of the war is because there was a Polish family that took her in. The only reason she survived is because these strangers took care of her. And after the war, she always used to talk about how millions of people died in World War II because ordinary people sat back and just remained silent. And they said, look, it's not my issue. I'm not Jewish, so why should I care what's happening? Not realizing how problematic that was. Fast forward to today, and about 6 to 8 months ago, I had a kid come to school online. She was clearly very upset. She's a 15-year-old gender fluid kid who shared with me that she receives cyberbullying death threats on a regular basis to the point where she has coping mechanisms. And I mentioned I don't identify as LGBTQ, but I started thinking about how many kids there are who do identify as LGBTQ and how much backlash there is towards LGBTQ plus youth and adults as well. And I'm very comfortable saying this. I am a straight white man. I know the privilege that comes with that. And I can either sit back and sort of let that privilege go to waste, or I can try to do something to help a community that needs help. So that's sort of where my passion comes from, is this idea that no one's ever told me I'm not allowed to identify as a man. No one's ever told me I'm not allowed to love my wife. But there's thousands, if not millions, of 15-year-old kids that have to go through situations like the one Kylie had to go through. And I don't want to let my privilege go to waste on that. I'm not just going to sit back while there's kids that have to deal with that.
Thank you, Grant. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, stepping in here, if you don't mind, Kim. Sorry, I don't mean to overstep. Is I think to trailblaze the way for others. You know, as someone who was born with a disability and is also openly gay, is, you know, I've always had to overcome adversity and gone through a lot of crap throughout my whole life, and my whole you know, mission in life is to trailblaze for others and not have to have them go through the same crap that I've had to go through, from the bullying to the, you know, being excluded from things, to the disrespect, to the challenges. And so I'm just here to make that path easier for future generations, as well as generations that are out there today, to break down their barriers for them, people whose voices aren't heard or do not wish to express their voices and are maybe a little bit more shy, and allow them to be able to access things that they should be able to access. So just again, creating that environment for them by blazing the way there.
I think for me, being able to sport pretty much has always been a part of my life. You know, soccer was my thing. It's been there before I knew I was gay. I was playing soccer before I knew I was gay. And even though I came out as a teenager, the experience that I had with the majority of my teammates was positive, in that they supported me. And I always had this need for team. When my parents weren't always available, or when they weren't, my mother wasn't accepting of me being openly gay, etc., and having to go through that, sport was always there. And so being an advocate for myself, for one, and learning how to come out in an environment, even though I was really lucky that I came out in Northern California, and my first Pride Parade was when I was 18 in San Francisco. It's pretty awesome and great. But there were things that were going on. Being a female athlete, and the football team was really abusive to gay men, and there were women that were raped by several players on the team, and we couldn't really advocate for ourselves as women, and we couldn't advocate for ourselves as lesbians. And so for me, finding groups and finding opportunity to be around people who looked like me, acted like me, etc., sport was always there to help me through that. And for me to be able to give back to kids, you know, I mean, I coach now, you know, I've coached for 14 years, and give back to the sport that raised me. And I have, it's awesome now, because I was fired for being gay before, not in the coaching arena, but I was threatened to be fired for being gay as a coach. And there were ways that I had to traverse this, oh my gosh, you were working with children and dealing with those stereotypes of what our influences, right, on kids, and the horrible things that people say about gay people and our influence on children. And so I wanted to give back to that. And I think it's important that the louder you are and the more advocating you do, the more people can see you. And I refuse to go back in the closet.
Kim, can I ask a follow-up?
Of course.
Sorry, Ashley, I'm kind of like stealing the role here. How did that whole situation play out when you were threatened to be fired for being gay?
Which time? So when I first started coaching, I was 21. Well, I was technically 18, but when I had moved to Michigan, one of my classmates in my master's degree program was a man who was coaching his daughter and his daughter's team. And he kind of had the forethought of, wow, I really think that a female coach is really powerful and influential, and all men coach women. There are no female coaches. And he had learned that I had played college ball. And he also knew that since I was in my master's program, he knew that I was openly gay. And his statement was, if people find out you're gay, I'll protect you. So he knew I was gay, but he was asking me for my own safety to not be out when I'm coaching 12-year-old kids, including his daughter. And so during that period of time, it was the last time that the AIDS quote was being shown in Washington, D.C. And our team had a soccer tournament, and we went to DC, and my cousins had died of AIDS. They're twin brothers. They died about 3 years apart. And I wanted to go see the AIDS quilt at the same time that we were there. My girlfriend at the time was, she traveled to Washington, D.C. as well with two of her friends. And so it was this really kind of hard dynamic where I was like, is this my friend or is my girlfriend? How do I do this? My roommate had come with me, and my girlfriend was also half German, half white. So we just messed everybody's diversity issues up, right? We blew it out of the water with being, dating someone who's black identified, right? And her first language was German. So it just messed with everybody. But I got outed because of an experience there, and half of the parents wanted me fired. And so the man that I was working with, he advocated for me and protected me, even though I wasn't, quote unquote, holding her hand, I wasn't doing anything. It was that she fit stereotypically androgynous type gender dynamic and didn't fit along the binary. And so you get outed by pure existence. And that experience of asking me to be in the closet, but then getting outed and then having to ask for forgiveness creates shame. And so I refused to take that shame on. So I, basically was just like, no, I'm going to be who I am, and you're going to either accept me or you're not. And over a period of time, those parents, I won them over and became close to them. And some of those kids are now out. And they said that because of that experience, they're now in their 30s, and they're like, Coach Kim, I wouldn't have been able to come out if you weren't outed. So some of those experiences, even though they were traumatic in a lot of ways, I still end up coming out on the other side of that. And I'm really happy that I'm an out coach now. And, that's not me. That's very strange. That's not me. I don't know what is going on. Hold, please.
All right, we're going to chalk that up to technical difficulties, a little bit of music intermission. So far, no questions in chat. Let's see. We're going to wait for Kim to figure herself out. While we do that, as I told the panelists, I'm also a lesbian identifying female, so this is a perfect panel for me to moderate. Very excited. Oh, wait, here's Kim. No. Kim said she'll be back. Okay, so she'll get it handled. Let's see, Jonathan or Grant. Let's see, definitely a unique panel. I'm very excited about this to have, again, Grant, a straight, white male. That's huge to have you here today and to support us. So we really appreciate that. Jonathan, do you have any stories relating to that you would like to share?
Well, I think kind of playing off of a little bit of what, Kim was saying earlier, I think, kind of overcoming that, and how do you kind of win people over and understand like beyond that barrier. And I think that's kind of a huge part, seeing that there are more and more coaches that have either come out as part of the LGBTQIA community, or have, been there from the very beginning as an LGBTQIA member of the community. I think is kind of shown, like I said, as kind of a person to look up to. Obviously, in the kind of straight heterosexual world, as you join a football team, you see the football coach, obviously he's straight, he's got his, perfect house, perfect family kind of situation. And so I think it is very powerful to see people, like him and others like that in the environment and in the community, to have heroes to look up to for future generations. As a coach, it's like, I want to be like you one day, and I use my background and advocate for the better, but also not only, be a role model as an out, LGBTQIA member, but also just a, a coach, see yourself as just a part of the team. And I think as myself, my experiences being kind of the out person on a team, when I lived at the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center, there weren't any other out athletes on the team there, or any of the sports. I was swimming, but there were also, 10 other sports to train there, from, wrestling to weightlifting to triathlon and judo and all sorts of sports that existed. And so being kind of one of the only out people there, I think it, is definitely a struggle, but I see now that there are more, and see that like it's okay. And seeing the kind of the representation behind it really does matter, and you may not see it now, and I don't, obviously not speaking for Kim, but you may not see it now, but down the road you might see like, wow, you may have changed that person's life, or you may have saved their life going forward. And allowed them to then be able to have the opportunity to be an out coach or an out athlete at the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center, and just be able to kind of, again, trailblaze that way for future generations that they didn't see coming before.
Thank you, Jonathan. We're going to move back to Kim after giving us a musical intermission.
Sorry about the musical interlude. It was, I had my screen still having the actual network and events going on, and they were changing the panel, and that was the music, and so I had to close all those tabs. I truly apologize. Thank you for your patience. So Jonathan, PS, by the way, I've been to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. It's awesome. It's a phenomenal facility. I too have been to the Olympic Training Center in Guadalajara, Mexico when I was playing soccer. And so it's a pretty phenomenal experience to train in those environments. So that's badassery right there, sir.
Yeah, I've been to that one too. Phenomenal facility. I went to the Pan Am Games at that facility. It's great facility.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I certainly was not on the women's national team. I got my butt kicked by those players. So I was good. I was not elite. There's a distinct difference between those players than myself. But what I was sharing about answering Grant's question about what was that experience like and being outed and the threat of being outed and the assumptions that people made. Obviously, when I came out, I came out in 1990. And so things that were going on at the time in California were things where they wanted to fire people as teachers. There were amendments that were being passed around in various cities. The AIDS epidemic was still massively impacting our community. And then when I went to Michigan, coming from California to Michigan is culture shock for me in many ways. And then I had a Black girlfriend and that just messed everybody up. So it was like one of these things is not like the other. And I was very much, I looked different, even though I can play the heteronormative game if I want to. When my hair is done and I'm in heels and I wear makeup, people think that I'm straight and I refuse to be in the closet. So I come out all the time. And I think being an invisible minority in that I'm an outward majority person, I'm obviously white. You can't hide your color of your skin, right? So people think I'm a white heterosexual female. And so when I opt to not let them assume that and tell them flat out that I'm not, it kind of messes with people. And so when you also have a biracial girlfriend at the time, when I came out, it just messed with people and they didn't really know how to accept that. And they weren't used to, they being the people in Michigan, weren't really used to having a vocal person who would talk about anti-racism work, as well as a vocal person who was talking about anti-homophobic work, right? So I started developing diversity trainings. I was on speakers panels since I was 18. I've been doing advocacy work and sitting on LGBTQ panels since I was young. And I've taught LGBTQ issues and sexual orientation and sexual identity since I was a kid, 2 kids, age 7 and above. So I just refuse to allow it to be quote unquote seen as abnormal. It's normal to be human and that there's all kinds of people who fit among this human construct. So for me, I have been fired for being gay. I was fired from a restaurant in Colorado for being gay. I was threatened to be fired for coaching kids. That was the hardest one, you know, not just on the Michigan team, but in Colorado as well. And then having to have a heterosexual white male defend you when heterosexual white males were offended by you. It's important to have that, but it's also really frustrating that men speak for women. I have to say, it's really hard when you do traverse. I face more discrimination being a woman than I do facing things as a lesbian, because that's what people see first, is that I'm woman first. So I deal with that differently, just as much as they see that I'm an able-bodied person differently than a person who's in a wheelchair, or my friend who's deaf, who's on the Olympic team, you know? And so it's what we see and who we are is bigger. We're bigger than what you see. And I think that our community is much larger than people want to admit. And so I just refuse to be in the closet about it.
Thank you, Kim. I really appreciate what you said. And I'm taking notes here. One comment you made that I've never thought about is you said you have to come out all the time. Now I can relate to that because I think that, I mean, at my age 35 and Kim, you probably played, you're probably still playing sports. So I think that there's like a level of anxiety in a lot of situations, either going into a friend group at a restaurant or going out to a concert, or in, you know, sports, obviously coming onto a new team. So I think there's a level of anxiety each time, you know, you're going to go to a new group of people. Do I have to come out? Does somebody already know? Did somebody tell somebody? What's the coach going to think? I think that there's always that level of anxiety. And I don't know if, you know, Kim and Jonathan, if you can relate to, I think there's an anxiety aspect that comes along with it that you already have going forward. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think Kim touched on, and she said it so beautifully, is peeling back the layers of your minority-ness, and coming out not only once but like twice as minority. Yes, I'm a white male, but I'm also a visible disability as a quad amputee, and then I'm also an openly out gay person. And so it's like you have to come out of the closet twice. First as a disabled person, and then as the gay person, and I think Kim touched on that beautifully. You have anxiety because now you've got this double closet that you're in or trying to get out of, and continuously like doubly coming out of the closet in a way, and so I think that's it does bring a lot of anxiety because you have to, prove yourself not only once as for myself being a disabled person, but then you got to prove yourself again as being a disabled or as a gay person. And I know that I dealt with that at the Olympic Training Center, and Olympic and Paralympic Training Center is like, yes, I'm out as a disabled athlete because obviously we're all here as Paralympic swimmers. We're all disabled, but then I have to come out on top of that, as an openly gay man. And it's just like the anxiety of continuously proving yourself through peeling back these layers of minority, as Kim has mentioned, I think is such an anxiety driven component that is super stressful and hard to like, how do you do it? It's just like every time you meet somebody, it's like, okay, here we go again. We're doing this again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that's different for people in our community is we have to negotiate our level of physical and emotional safety in every arena we're in every day. So you may not think about it. I mean, I've been out for 30 years, so I don't lead with the fact that I'm a lesbian. My name's Kim. I'm not lesbian Kim, right? So like I'm Kim, but and I'm single. So that's always interesting too. Like if I go out to a bar, and there are really no gay bars anywhere where I live. So I go out to straight bars and I want to just hang out and watch the sunset at the beach. I mean, I live in a beautiful place, and I'll get hit on by a guy and I'm like, no, sorry. And then they take it as an invitation. My lesbianism is not an invitation to pursue me further, right? And so it's the dynamic of how men interact with women is still the same in our community too, in that how we pursue people, how we view things through our lens. We're raised in the same heteronormative environments, right? So people's assumption is straight always. No one goes in going, oh, these people, there's half the room that's gay, or there's always an assumption of heteronormativity. And so I have to negotiate my safety. I'm female. If I'm alone, if it's late at night, if I've been harassed, I've had people, try to hit me, physically assault me, for being openly gay. I think men who are gay have to walk their walk differently than women have to walk their walk. We walk our walk differently as women anyway. And then we deal with men thinking that, lesbian porn is their version of what a lesbian relationship is. And so they take it to a sexual level all the time. And it's like, no, I just exist. I'm a human being, like it's not about who I sleep with, and it's not who's the man in the relationship. There isn't one. I'm gay. I'm lesbian. There's a lesbian in the relationship, So those kinds of assumptions people don't always think about. And so how people speak to me the way that people speak to me allows me to know what's safe or not. So if someone says, are you dating, or is different than where's your husband? So there's an assumption of heteronormativity in one, and the other is more open-ended. So being able to have conversation with people and say, are you dating anyone? Not using, gender, not using assumptive language, not assuming that someone is unintelligent because we speak differently or use different terms. It's not about being woke. It's not anything about it. It's about accepting other people. And so that anxiety that you touched on, Ashley, is this undercurrent always of emotional and physical safety that we maneuver because we are invisible to most people. We have an invisible difference per se, right?
So Kim, I'm going to ask you something, and I will fully recognize that this may be ignorant, so please forgive me.
I've been asked a bunch of things and nothing will bother me. I've done this panel type thing for years. Feel free. This is why we have these conversations, is to be able to have questions be asked of us in a safe place. So feel
Well,
free.
and I think it's more of an opinion thing. So something I saw was this idea that if you are a woman and you just say, I have a boyfriend, a lot of times men will back off because they sort of feel threatened. They don't want to mess with another man.
Mhm.
I'm curious your insight on that, because if you were to say something like that, obviously that's sort of, to use your words, putting yourself back in the closet. I don't know if that would be safer, less safe. I don't know. I'm just sort of curious your insight on that.
I will never pretend, nor do I want anyone to ever think that I'm straight. I hate it. I don't ever want to be assumed that I'm straight. I will never use a caveat that I have a boyfriend. I don't want a man to be the reason why I have to be protected from another man. That is a patriarchal concept that I don't ever want to engage in. But I understand why some people do it, because there's different reasons for safety, right? So for me, you'll never hear me say that I have a boyfriend to protect myself. I'll just have that guy get his butt kicked by somebody, because I'm not going to put up with it. You know, like I will not allow myself to lower myself or think that there's any shame in being an openly gay person. There's no shame in that. So I won't allow that. There's shame in hiding. There's not shame in being out. So
That's a good line.
Safety for me is important, but I would never use the protective caveat, so to speak, that a man's going to save me from another man, because that's not true. So I don't want to lie about who I am either. So if I feel unsafe, I'll exit, or I'll find a way to be protected, but I won't hide behind that label in any way. Because being assumed that I'm straight is really insulting to me. It really bothers me to be assumed that I'm straight, because I don't live my life as a straight person, and I never have. I can't view the world through that lens. I don't know what that feels like. So I don't like when people assume that I'm straight. Good question though.
No, I figured you might have some insight on it. And then I know, Jonathan, I know you took yourself off mute. I sort of have a follow-up for all three of you, but Jonathan, did you have something?
I mean, I get that whole vulnerability. I mean, I'm a quad amputee. You know, sometimes I use prosthetic legs. Sometimes I use a wheelchair, and it's regardless of whether I'm in the wheelchair or the legs, it's not easy for me to like just escape. And so there is that vulnerability aspect that's always ever present with me. And you know, obviously Kim's got her techniques. There are times where I know situational awareness that, you know, I may need to, and I kind of feel guilty in a way that there are times where I'll be in an environment where I feel sometimes it may need to be appropriate to kind of be straight for just a little bit, just to like get out of an environment. I know it's not what I want. It's not what any of us want, but sometimes, you know, when you're in an environment and you're surrounded by a lot of very toxic straight men, you just need to, I don't want to say play the part to get out of it, but sometimes you need to play the part to get out of it. And I'm very fortunate. I know the term is very toxic in the LGBTQIA community, but I am passing, you know, I am a passing, you know, straight male, whatever looking thing. But, you know, sometimes you do have to do it knowing my own vulnerability in my own disability situation, that, you know, it's not what I want, but sometimes you just got to play the part to get out of an unhealthy, toxic environment.
I think when I've traveled, and depending on where I was, I won't necessarily be out and open. I won't necessarily wear, you know, rainbow stuff if I'm out and open, but claiming or stating that I'm straight or saying that I have a boyfriend, I don't use. If I need to let people assume something, I'll let them assume it, but I won't encourage that assumption necessarily.
Yeah, that's a good
in international travel, I am depending on where I've traveled to, I need to make sure that I don't out myself. The danger is very different in the South, for example, for me, than it is where I live in California. But you know, in Michigan, there were certain parts that definitely didn't want to be outed in certain ways. I think outing yourself and being outed are also two important distinctions that coaches and anyone who works with athletes, if someone comes out to you, it's a trust piece, and it's not up to anyone else to out that person. And so even though I coach kids and some of my kids have come out, it's not up to me to tell anyone else whether what they identify as or how they identify. And I have had some people out me thinking that that's appropriate because I am open about it. It's not for anyone's place to say that I'm openly gay unless I do it. So I think that's a really important thing for people who are wanting to be allies is don't assume that it's okay to out someone, even if they outed themselves to you, because the danger is for us to meander and for us to that's our privilege to be able to share those and that piece of information with other people. So I wanted to touch on that as well. Don't out people at all. It's not okay and it's not safe.
Thank you. So far, I will say this has been a much more spicy panel than it was last year. Thank you to you all. I do want to bring it back because I want to make sure I want to make sure that if there are coaches that watch this, Kim, you just talked about coaches and you are one, and bring it back to the youth. Do you all have any advice that you would like to give coaches that are teaching our youth that may be, struggling right now? We all know that that's a fact, that we have youth out there somewhere struggling in the closet, going to sports, have not come out yet. And maybe what you said, Kim, does happen, that a student or a child comes out to a coach. Maybe they haven't even come out to their parents. They might be close with their coach. You know what I'm saying? They could have a toxic relationship with their parents at home, and they come out to their coach. What advice would you give to that coach?
So I have two kids on my current team. One is out to the team and one is not out to the team. And they both, and then one wants they, them pronouns. So being able to have conversation of what's safe and not, how to treat people. So we do different things. Like, I don't call my kids girls, I call them humans. I'll call them kids, I'll call them players, to not always use gender specific language, even though I coach a girls team, to allow my one player who wants to have they, them pronouns feel included. My other player who only outed herself to me wanted to out herself to this other person, but this other person is so boisterous that she doesn't relate. So that's also an interesting dynamic. So getting them to a therapist and making sure that they have the ability to talk about their feelings to an appropriate person. I used to be a therapist. I'm not a therapist anymore. And so sometimes coaches feel that there is a privilege that someone is sharing this private conversation, but I always want to give those kids opportunity to go to a support group or to something like PFLAG or different programming that allows them to communicate outside of the team in a safety manner, so that they don't have to out themselves to their family. Because it is very real that some kids get kicked out. We know this. The homeless youth population is over 50% identified in the LGBTQI community. That is horrifying to know how many parents have given up on their children, and that the majority of homeless youth identify with our community. So as a coach who works with young kids, use language that's inclusive. Use things, allow people to talk about different religions, allow people to talk about different languages. So one of the things that we do, we ask a question of the day. My kids wanted to do this. So whenever we were first bringing a new player on, you ask the name game, what's your name? And then there's a question that everybody answers. So you start to learn about things. And the kids wanted to keep that little activity going through the whole season. And so they, during their stretching circle, they asked what's one question of the day. And one of them is like, how many of you speak other languages? We have a player who's from Turkey, a player who's from Egypt, a player who is from Mexico. And so we have different religions. And so we, celebrate Hanukkah and we celebrate those things. So being inclusive includes LGBTQ issues. So just having a normalization of language around all kinds of things to embrace what kids can use in sport. We all can relate to that. And so they're calling people humans, calling them kids, sharing with the kids that you need to be able to be yourself is a really powerful piece too. so that you don't exclude anyone, and then don't out the kid. Let them guide that process. Let them guide that process.
Yeah, and I think that was one thing, I've done a little bit of coaching myself in the past as well. And so, and even just in the everyday language is just always try to use just, very gender neutral pronouns throughout anything. It takes a little bit of self-awareness, a little bit of self-training to get your brain to use the they, them, their pronouns throughout just, referring to, and I love what Kim said about referring to them as players and humans. I think that's a great technique, I think, as well. I've said athletes, or I've said, hey, team, I use the word team in the past, and that's what I've always used, just because it shows that we're still one united front. We're still one united team. And that's what I've used when I did some coaching in the past, because that again shows that you're committed to them and that they're still part of the team, regardless of, any bit of their LGBTQIA or religion or any other aspect, that they are still a valued member of the team.
I think too, if you use examples of players or athletes in a professional world who also identify, and not always pick heterosexual people as the icons to celebrate, finding other players and other athletes that look like the kids you coach, and finding those examples and role models that they can look up to. My friend who does a podcast is amazing, and she always says this phrase, you can't be what you can't see. And so providing opportunity for kids to see what they could grow up into is powerful. So if they're a person of color, identifying an athlete who is in the sport, who's a person of color, or someone who is a different religion, the same religion, and seeing that athlete and finding those ways to be a bridge, those ways to show them that you might not understand what they're going through, but that you can find someone who can, and relating that to them, that they can see an adult who's healthy and happy and human, being in their humanness. Yeah.
Kim and Jonathan, props to both of you for being so conscious of the language stuff. I think about it a lot in a classroom when, my default when I started off teaching was always, all right, guys. And I try to be conscious of it, and I still catch myself doing things like that on occasion.
Sure.
And I think, Kim and Jonathan, you already hit the big ones I was going to say. The only thing that I would add on is recognize that you will make mistakes, recognize that you will mess up. You're going to fall back on old habits sometimes. And one thing that we constantly talk about with Pride Tree, and I think about a lot, is just growth. Because I don't identify as LGBTQ, I know that there are things I don't understand, as well as people who do identify as LGBTQ. I know that there are things that I'm just gonna mess up on. So I think a lot about all right, great. You make a mistake, you use inappropriate language, something like that. Try not to do it, be conscious of it. But if you do, hey, I'm really sorry about that. Let me learn from it and move on.
Yeah, consciously misgendering someone, or consciously choosing to use and continually use wrong language in addressing someone, is different than making the inadvertent mistake. We all make mistakes. I mean, our panel alone is not really descriptive of all of the people in our community, right? Jonathan and I can only speak to our individual experiences of what walking this earth is in this body that we're in. And so I can't speak for all people who identify as a lesbian, right? He can't speak for all people who are gay men. So, we all have to be willing to make mistakes. We all have to be willing to grow. And we all have to be willing to change. And I mean, obviously I've been out for 30 years. The language has changed. I never identified as cisgender before until a few years ago, and realizing that was something that would help people understand the difference between trans and people who are cis, and using it as an adjective, right? And not calling someone a transgendered human. It's like learning language and being conscientious about that is the beauty of humanity, and we need to grow and be willing to make those mistakes. And I think that that's a powerful thing, to be willing to make the mistake, to be willing to ask the questions and to make mistakes, for sure.
I think about that a lot with the Pride Tree board, because when we set out, I wanted to have as diverse of a board as humanly possible. I'm the only straight white guy on that board, and I'm very, very proud of that. Majority of our board are people of color. Great. Majority of our board identifies LGBTQ. Wonderful. We have multiple Black women on our board. Great. We have multiple bilingual board members. Cool. I love our board. I'll brag on the board all day long. But to your point, Kim, we don't have anyone who's trans. We don't have any white lesbians on the board. I mean, the diversity stuff, I think, is something where you need to constantly be striving for improvement and, try to incorporate and be as inclusive as you humanly can, but also just know that there's always going to be some area that you can improve upon, and that's where it goes back to the growth stuff too.
I want to ask a question and see if you all agree. So for the people who are watching, we're doing this live right now on a panel, but I think that in our lives, this panel doesn't stop. So when we stop recording this today, this is going to continue for us in our lives 24/7. We're going to continue to be ambassadors and continue to have questions asked of us. And just like Grant said, have questions asked of us of the LGBT community that we may not know, like including getting asked questions about transgender, even though I am not, I also get asked those questions. So Kim and Jonathan, I want to know if you can relate to feeling like you have to be, I mean, you have to prove yourself in multiple forms. As you said, we have to continue to be a panel, and the spotlight's on us. If you feel that way, that like even for our team, that we have to be, set the example 24/7 if you feel a pressure with that.
So I guess speaking on this, I think, and Kim's just kind of touched on it a little bit, is I always, whenever I do my own public speaking, is I always start off every speech by saying my opinions are my own, my ideals are my own. I am one person. I represent myself. I do not represent the entire LGBTQIA spectrum. And this is my own experience. And I think that alone, even when I, meet somebody and someone asks me, like, starts asking me questions about the trans community, like as a diversity and inclusion, public speaker and workshop leader, I try to get as much knowledge and experience as I can. But I always, if they ask me a question about, say, like I said, the trans community, I always start again with that, these are my opinions and my own, and this is, I represent myself. And so that way I'm always just saying, hey, this is my own experience as a gay male. I am not fully aware, and able to answer your questions from a firsthand experience. But this is the information that I have researched. You're welcome to do some information as well. Just kind of as like a little bit of almost like a liability aspect of it, but also do just give respect to the other members of the community as well. That like, I'm not an expert on the whole LGBTQIA spectrum. I will fully admit it that I am not. I try to get as much knowledge as I can, and I try to be, quote unquote, an ally to everybody else, on this. But, again, my opinions are my own and my experience is my own. And if you want to ask me, I will answer as best as I can, but I don't have experience in certain fields.
Yeah, I agree. I think our community is a microcosm of the larger community. Just because someone identifies as gay doesn't mean I'm going to be friends with them, right? So we all have like, there's a commonality if you identify within the community. But for example, like when I came out, the word queer is not positive. Okay. I don't like being referred to as queer. I don't use it in my own words because we played games called Smear the Queer and beat the crap out of people using those horrible names. So for me, the reappropriation of that term has been really difficult because it's like, oh, it just sits with me weird, right? Even though it doesn't bother me that people identify as queer. So for me, when we use language, the best way that I can share with people is like, if I introduce myself as Kim, call me Kim. If someone introduces themselves with they, them pronouns, just do your best to reflect that back and mirror it back. And I can't speak for everyone. And I certainly don't represent everyone. And just like Jonathan, I have my own opinions. Not everybody likes me. Not everybody likes the opinions that I have, and that's okay. That's just human nature. And so being able to be informed as much as possible about what other people's experiences are is important, but I certainly can't say that I'm an expert on all things LGBTQA either. My best friend knows more than I am. She's a professor of human sexuality. She's the one I have to go to and go, what language is this? What term is this? I don't know how to use this language, so she identifies as bisexual. So each person is different. And I think that what you touched on too, Ashley, of it's constant to be the only person who identifies as gay in a room of straight people. And I think that becomes tiring, where I don't always want to be asked about gay things necessarily in a room. I'd like to be asked about other things that are of importance to myself, right? So sometimes being the only one, being a small business owner, I tend to be the only female in a room of men 90% of the time. So I deal with the male-female dynamic a little bit more than the gay dynamic sometimes. But I mean, to be the only woman in the room and the only gay person in a room often can be exhausting. So that it does become tiring if people constantly toss that question at you to answer for the community. And sometimes I have to exit out of it. Yeah.
Grant, did you have anything to add on to that?
No, I mean, I'm just kind of chuckling to myself because, like, I don't know that anyone has ever come to me and been like, hey, you're straight. Go talk for everyone who's straight. Like, I sort of get that being Jewish, but I don't know that anyone's been like, you're white. Go tell me all about white people. And
it's an assumption.
It's a total assumption. And I think, Kim, you brought it up before, just the idea of youth kind of knowing. And again, I have not lived the experience of being LGBTQ, but I find it so fascinating when people ask, well, isn't so-and-so too young to know if they're gay? And I'm like, look, at what point did you know you were straight? Or like, well, watching this, listening to Lil Nas X's music is going to turn someone gay. What turned me straight? I think it's mind-boggling to just take those types of things that people say about the LGBTQ community and just replace LGBTQ with straight. And it completely shows how insane a lot of things are. Yeah, I just think that's interesting. I also saw something talking about how when you're under 18, or we'll say 16, when you're under 16, you're told, oh, you're too young to know. And then between like 16 and maybe 22, you're just experimenting and trying to figure yourself out, or it's just a phase, whatever. And then at some point you're an adult and they're like, well, wait, I always thought you were straight. Like, how come you're just now coming out? And I think that type of stuff is just really interesting to think about, how difficult it is for a lot of people to accept other people's gender and sexuality. And I always say, like, if you are not in a direct relationship with someone, like a romantic relationship with someone, who cares? Like, I'm not going to be in the bedroom with you, so it doesn't really make any difference to me.
Most of us know about our sexual orientation much earlier than we ever talk about it, because we don't have role models necessarily who are out, or we don't identify with that role model that is out, or, no one chooses to be an oppressed group of people and says, yay, giddy up, let me go get a whole bunch of discrimination put at me. I'm going to choose
all the advantages.
No one does that, like it's just some of those assumptions are just annoying. I mean, being out for as long as I am, I just don't have a lot of tolerance for certain things now. But sometimes it's like when people say, are you too young? I'm like, well, you were teaching me, I was learning about sex and seeing sexual behaviors of people on TV as a young kid. What's the difference if it's gay or straight? And then people are like, huh? Because it really is like that puppy dog, like, oh, because they didn't know. Because again, this is the assumption of heterosexuality. There's an assumption of whiteness. There's assumptions and privileges that are just automatically there and that we have to dismantle. And so even though it seems silly, and even though sometimes people say really annoying things, depending on how it comes out and depending on who says it, will determine my response. So, you know, if someone's really intrusive and someone's really rude, that's different. But if people want to know, like, when did you know? I knew when I was a little kid. I knew I was different when I was like 8. You know, it's not about sex. It was that I didn't do things the way my peers did. It wasn't about sex. You know, it was like, oh, I don't really like boys the same way that my friends are saying they like boys. And so that's just, we know a lot earlier.
When I was about 4 or 5, I used to always watch The Little Mermaid with my sister in her waterbed in suburban Minneapolis.
That's hilarious. You couldn't
Very
pay to watch
90s
Little
story.
Mermaid.
She had a mural of Shamu on her wall. It was a great bedroom. Whatever. Point is, my first crush was Ariel from The Little Mermaid at 4 or 5 years old. Great. I knew, like, oh, I like looking at this animated mermaid, but like, replace Ariel with Prince Eric. It's not that different, you know? I think that whole concept of like, you're born heteronormative, you go through life very linearly, and then you die. Like, that's not the real world.
No.
I don't want to interrupt, but we have 3 minutes left now on this panel. I wish we had another hour. So what I want to do is go ahead and give each of the panelists opportunity just to give like a closing statement. And if there's anybody watching right now that maybe is still in the closet, still struggling, if you have anything to say to them. And then lastly, if you would be available, your contact info on the internet site or Facebook page to take any questions after today's panel, if you're willing to do so. And I wanted to thank each of you for being here today.
Yeah. So my website is split-star.com. All my contact information can be found there. My email, my phone number, links to all my socials from LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. Yeah, it's all on there. So you can just find me on, again, split-star.com.
I put mine in the chat. Go ahead, Kim.
No, go ahead.
So I put mine in the chat already, but website is theproprietylv.com, and then my email address, grant.freilich@theproprietylv.org. Feel free to reach out, visit the site, learn more about what we're doing, and I am always here to chat.
Yeah, I actually do public speaking similar to Jonathan, and you know, I'm more than happy to be, if people want me to be on their panels or to talk to their kids or to talk to groups of coaches, etc. I obviously do business coaching and work with small business owners, but I also sit on panels for PFLAG and things to be able to talk with people and help educate people on these issues. And yeah, thank you for having us. I think it's important for young athletes to be able to see that adults can be happy and healthy.
All right, well, thank you very much everyone for being on this year's panel, and I wish you the best of luck for the rest of the year.
Awesome, thanks Ashley. Thanks guys, Jonathan and Grant, nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you. Kim, if you have a minute, I have another question for you.
Okay, I'll stay on.
Offline.
Sure.